Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by T.A. Forsberg and Wagoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
The state of Michigan's deployed a tremendous amount of effort, amount of resources to change the world's narrative on Michigan for the better. One area that comes under fire is the quality of our K-12 education system. And here to discuss some statistics and what's being done to make Michigan a more credible developer of talent is the Director of Masters of Arts and Teaching for Calvin University, Mr. Erek Kooyman. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we'll talk about the testing scores post-pandemic, but start a little bit. Your work in this area started well before the pandemic happened. So talk about your involvement in this area and your role at Calvin and what overall you're trying to accomplish with your work in this field.
Sure. Yeah, I've been with Calvin for 4 years now. Prior to that, I spent several years, over a decade, working in the Grand Rapids public school system.
Okay.
First as a middle school math teacher, and then later as an elementary principal. So through those experiences, I spent a lot of time with data, student data, school data, district data, and working to try to improve test scores, in particular in mathematics, with some success.
Got it. And the state of Michigan, from a national perspective, where do we tend to rank historically as whatever metrics they use to say these are the states that are doing a really good job and these are the states that aren't doing a really good job? Where has Michigan historically landed? Yeah,
historically, we're pretty low. If you look especially over the last 20 years or so, in regards to the pandemic as well, usually, in somewhere in the bottom five.
Wow. For
the last few years, that is true of test scores, NAEP scores. That's also true of our school funding. So those things tend to correlate with each other quite closely.
Got it.
And that's been that way now for a few decades.
And so your work at Calvin is to try to bring this information and solutions to this problem to the stakeholders, right? To try to deliberately improve these scores to make our students more prepared for life after academics, correct?
Sure. Our primary work is teacher education.
Okay.
So bringing and training new teachers to the profession. Also ongoing, we have several different master's programs for current teachers. But teacher education, and so one of the courses that I teach is math pedagogy for elementary school teachers, which is, if we want to kind of go back to like where do the struggles with math achievement start, it's in elementary school, if not before. So we are really coming at it from the teacher education and teacher preparation standpoint, wanting to make sure that our teachers are there, first of all.
Yep.
Experiencing a shortage in particular in the STEM fields, which includes mathematics. So bringing people into the field, but then also making sure they're prepared with best practices, so that we can improve upon some of the results that we've seen.
Got it. So, my brain is really opening up to this topic as we're having this conversation, and what you're asserting really is that it's nuance and curriculum and style of teaching that makes it either effective or not effective. Or my brain naturally kind of goes to is the child able to just get the concepts? But I guess their ability to get the concepts comes from the manner in which they're being taught the concepts.
I think that's a really good way of saying it.
Okay.
So most of us, myself, probably you, when we learned math starting in elementary school, the emphasis was often on memorization. Mm-hmm. If I asked you what makes a math person, right? Like what makes a good math student? I won't put you on the spot, but I'm guessing you and like many of my students would say when we first started to talk about this, that you could memorize things really well and that you could do your math facts really quickly.
Right.
So there's an emphasis on memorization, procedure, process, and doing that quickly. First of all, that is one type of math. We also try to redefine what math is. It's actually a very broad topic that requires a lot of different types of thinking. And really what math is problem solving. So that's why we do math, because we want our students to be able to go out into the world and solve problems creatively and innovatively. But that doesn't always correlate to how we see math being taught in the classroom, right? So memorizing facts, rattling them off quickly is not the same thing as solving complex problems collaboratively, creatively, and with innovation. So, but that's a really hard shift for us to make,
right.
for our teachers to make. When we've been taught one way and then we're put in that situation, our tendency is to go back to the way that we experienced it. So we're trying to disrupt that a little bit and come at it from a different way.
Got it. Okay. So now obviously you're employed by Calvin University, and your core mission is to obviously educate and train teachers in this field to be as effective as they can be for your university. Am I correct in understanding that you're part of an ecosystem that is trying to, beyond Calvin University, get other academia and even, whether it's government and budgets and funding and lobby and advocate for this to be more global, whether it's Michigan or even just nationwide, to make our students better? You are above, you do that too. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm an educator, right? Yep. So I feel, everything that we do in the university, right? There's the work that we do in training teachers, recruiting and training teachers. But we're also committed to the success of the bigger picture, right? Of students ultimately. And so, absolutely, of service to the community. I pay very close attention to what's happening in education policy at the state, federal, local level, school board elections, things like that. So absolutely.
And so how do you, so paying attention and getting involved, but do you go and present in front of our legislators, or do you have, coffee conversations with people under the governor's administration, or how do you outwardly push your agenda?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of that right now. I would say most of our conversations in the university level are, related to that teacher education piece.
Yep.
We certainly follow all of that and have those conversations. And the university, we try to produce research that might inform some of those decisions, and we certainly follow the current research.
So of the states that score well, right, because you talked about bottom 5 state, so the top 5 states, can you summarize for our listeners and me, like, what you would consider the best practices? Like, what are they doing right that we might be able to emulate?
Yeah, so I guess there's maybe two things. There's pedagogy, and then I think there's kind of like program and policy stuff.
Okay.
I really think that you have to have both of those, right? You can have really good pedagogy, but if the policy does not create a situation in which the pedagogy can take hold, it doesn't matter, right? And you can have great policy, but without good pedagogy, there's no application of the intent of the policy. So I think, Massachusetts is one that always gets brought up. A lot of emphasis on pedagogy. And when we talk about math education, what a lot of the research tells us, if our goal is really to inspire students to think creatively and to give them the tools to do that and to solve problems, we need to teach them how to problem solve. So that becomes the center of what we're doing, is teaching problem solving skills rather than memorizing facts. Not that those facts are not important,
right?
But we have to shift our emphasis a little bit. I'll come back to that, or I can come back to that. So those pedagogy, those high leverage practices that focus on problem solving and that are more student centered, those things tend to happen. The other thing is that, at the policy level, how do we fund our schools? Oftentimes our standardized test scores can be very easily predicted by the demographics of the community that the school is in. Right. So high poverty schools in high poverty communities, that's probably the largest predictor. We can look at other things like level of parent education. We can look at race. We can look at social class. We can look at ability. But if you look at income, that's probably the easiest and simplest way to predict it. And so you can kind of predict test scores based on the demographics, based on income of a school. And that's not a binary. So oftentimes we say, well, that's either a high income school or a low income school. And there's more of a continuum than that. And we also have to look at the concentration of higher income students and lower income students. So schools that have very high concentrations of low income students tend to struggle to produce consistent test scores, high achieving test scores. You may have like little blips here and there. And then higher income districts tend to score higher, and there may be blips the other way, but that's the trend. So one of the things that I think states that have seen more sustained improvement in those schools and communities that tend to struggle more, particularly those that have higher concentrations of lower income students, is they have a more complex funding formula for those schools. So Michigan actually just is developing. I think I don't think it's been passed yet, but it's in the. I think it came out of a committee, but a new type of what's called an opportunity index. So schools that have very high concentrations of higher poverty receive funding that is more or less targeted at that, right? So if you think about it, a lot of the things that come in a high poverty school where you have a lot of students coming from low income families is parents may be working second or third shift. Parents may have a lower educational attainment, so there's less support in the home.
Right.
Compared to like my kids, right? I have 2 kids that just finished 6th grade and 8th grade. I was a math teacher, so I'm pretty, I love helping them with their math. They don't love that I help them with their math, but I love that.
Right.
So anyways, like the resources are not there. What the research tells us is that students in those lower income concentrated schools need almost 100% more resources than students in a higher income school. So we're not close to that.
Right.
But maybe moving in that direction is something that can help us to move the needle.
Got it. I want to put a pin in that for a second and
Sure.
thank one of our sponsors, the Forsberg folks. When it comes to creating the best living and working environments for the community, no one does it better than my friends at the Forsberg Real Estate Company. Brent Forsberg and his team create vibrant, holistic communities that inspire growth and encourage belonging. Focused on building stronger connections for people, the Forsberg Project is always in tune with balancing relationships to create the optimum human experience. Since the 1950s, Forsberg has been enhancing the quality of life in the communities they serve by following the principles of regenerative growth and aligning the resources and tools available. Reach out to my friends at Forsberg Real Estate Company by calling 517-349-9330 or check out their website at lansingrealestate.com. So there's a lot of scrutiny about the test itself. To your point, if poorer communities, you have racial differences, and there's the metaphor about a fish can't climb a tree, so let's not have the test be climbing a tree if you're a fish, right? So
Sure.
How much are we trying to fit a square peg in a round hole by using maybe the same tests to rank whether Massachusetts and Michigan are comparable or not comparable, in addition to, obviously, it's probably a little bit of everything.
Absolutely. I mean, square peg, round hole is a good way to put it. The test only captures a fraction of what is actually learned in the classroom and what is experienced.
Yep.
Our teachers, I felt this as a teacher, I felt this as a school principal. We were able to achieve some pretty good gains during periods of time. Those things can be really hard to sustain.
Yep.
Right. So what we're looking for, sports analogy, right? Like we don't want to just win once and have that be it. Like we want to have sustained success.
Right.
So yes, we need to look at how we're measuring and what that is measuring and what it's not measuring. Teachers have a very difficult time, and I can fully relate to this as a former classroom teacher, moving from the kind of like fact-based, procedure-based type of teaching and learning, because I mean, quite frankly, it's easier to teach and it's easier for students to learn. The problem is it doesn't translate to what we actually need in society. We need it to be okay to make mistakes and then to persevere through that.
Right.
We're trying to teach, mindset. We're trying to teach that, there's not one way to solve a problem. There's more than one way.
Right.
The most complex problems in the world have not been solved yet. Right. There is not an easy answer. So that's what we really want to inspire in our students, and not a fear of getting it wrong or
Right.
not doing it quick enough, but a desire to discover something and to find a way and to collaborate on that. So that can be really hard for teachers when there are ways, we call it low-hanging fruit. There are things you can do to prepare your students to take tests better that will translate to marginal improvement in test scores. I don't think those are the things that we actually want our students to take away from their education, right? So teaching them strategies and tricks to take tests, or having them, know some really specific procedures that will gain them a few points on a test just is not, I don't think that's what we're trying to do.
And when I hear you talk about that, I think I've got two sons that are college age, right? And so one's a creative, and so he's in a film school, right? But he's being forced to take Spanish. It's like Masters of Arts or Masters of Science. One required Spanish, one required like computer coding. And he's just like, my brain doesn't work that way. Can't we, and then my other son is marketing and sales and business, right? And he hates the arts and isn't any good at that. I say that out loud just because, again, what do I know? But it seems like just trying to figure out what makes a kid tick early on, and then try to make them as good as they possibly can be at what they're naturally good at. I think a lot of times we point at kids and say, okay, you're good at these things over here and you're really struggling over here, so let's drive this stuff you're not good at into your head. But maybe you only need a certain amount of knowledge in that to be a productive human, and let's make you really, really good at the things you're naturally drawn to. I'm not sure whether the question really lies in that, but is there any consideration being given to these kids are math kids and science kids, and then these kids are poets and writers and business people and sales folks, and then just try to identify earlier on. I know Germany kind of has a way to assess, and their notion of high school is very different, and you go into one of 3 different tracks based on what you do in elementary school and what your propensities are. What are your thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, no, that's great. I have several thoughts. I think, so one thing I would say is I think it benefits our students to be alongside and learning with and from students that think really differently from them.
Yep.
I think that is something that we do uniquely in the United States, is we tend to say, hey, we're all going to be in this class together. And I think there's something really good about that. I think, I think about myself and some of my personality and tendencies and things that I'm good at, and it would be a disaster for me to be working with all people that were just like me, right? So,
good point.
So getting into pedagogy a little bit. So Michigan has identified 17 core teaching practices that they would like institutions like ours to focus on, as well as school districts to continue to develop their teachers in. Things that research has shown are kind of these high leverage practices. One of the first high leverage practices that we teach in a mathematics pedagogy course is called eliciting and interpreting student thinking. And so essentially it's doing what you kind of just described, where if you're my student, one of the things I'm going to do with you is I'm going to try to really understand how you think about this given topic or this given problem, right? And it gives me some insight into the way that you're approaching it, and then helps me to build a response. We also can do that in a way that other students can see how you think about it, right? So then we're starting to learn from each other and see that there's more than one way, and build off of that. It's really hard for teachers to do that, because we want, like, if I give a problem to you and ask you to do something with it, my job in using that practice is not to correct you or to tell you when you're doing it right or wrong. My job is to really understand how you're thinking about it.
Right.
So it's initially really uncomfortable for the teacher and for the student, because that's not what we're used to. We're used to being said, oh yeah, that's right, or no, that's wrong, you have to do it like this. Rather than really trying to dig deep and understand what is actually, how are you thinking about this, right? Like, okay, why do you think that? Tell me why did you do that? And when I'm saying why, it doesn't mean you did it wrong, right? Yep. So that's the other initial thing that we encounter, is that as soon as we start to ask why, oh, I did something wrong, right? Because, and that goes, I think, into something else that you said. Students develop a math identity really, really early on. I'm a math person, I'm not a math person, I'm good at it, I'm bad at it. So when I would get students coming into my middle school math, so I taught 7th and 8th grade math. When they would come in 7th grade, I would have students coming out, I'm not good at math. And I say, well, what aren't you good at, right? Because math is a huge thing, and there might be something you are good at that
Right.
falls
It's just a
within
process.
that
We need to find your
Right.
way of getting from the problem to the solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some students that can think visually, geometry and spatial, like that, talking about somebody who really likes art, like sometimes those folks are really good at kind of that spatial reasoning that comes into mathematics. Other students maybe more with the kind of abstract, right? So you're getting into algebra. Other students more with those number and operations. So I can do the calculations, but some of that abstract stuff I'm not so sure about.
Right. Okay. And then I threw out a Germany reference just because I studied there for a little bit and hosted exchange students. But are there any other countries that do this well that we could model after? You talked about kind of, Massachusetts versus Michigan, kind of the better and the not as good. And then we have our own national, federal kind of testing procedures, because if you're going to measure those two states,
Sure.
apples to apples, there needs to be some sort of overarching comparison model. But if you are there other countries that do it completely different and are getting better results than even Massachusetts?
I mean, two of the countries that get talked about the most often, I think, are Finland and Japan.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on comparative education, so I can't go too much into that. I think the Finland one is interesting to look at. I think that often does fit into kind of more of this problem-based teaching and learning.
Yep.
I think Japan does maybe there's some things that are overlap with what you described in Germany. Tracking has become a really bad word in education. And when that happens, I mean, at some point we do track, right? It's just that the debate is about when does that start, right? At what point do we decide for a student what opportunities are going to be available to them and what are not? And typically in the United States, like we basically try to do that throughout high school, right? We try to say, okay, everyone's going to take at least this number of courses. Maybe you get to your third year in high school and now maybe you're in kind of a more advanced track. But we tend to, like, it's fairly standardized, and in some ways, I think to your point, that's not always the best for everybody. In other ways, I think it protects kids, teenagers, from having decisions that are going to really impact their future,
Right.
Being made before they're really ready to be made.
Right on. Okay. I want to give another nod to one of our sponsors here at Michigan Reimagine. We tell stories of passionate Michiganders doing great things across the state. Today's podcast sponsor takes the art of positive storytelling to a whole new level. The good people at Good Marketing work with organizations across the state that have a positive impact on the lives of Michigan residents. They help educate communities on the importance of affordable housing, the impact of wildlife and natural resource management, the availability of workforce development and education programs. If it lifts people up and makes communities stronger, then they want to help tell and spread the word. If your organization needs help communicating the good work that you do, stop by their website at goodmarketing.com. That's GUD marketing.com. So Michigan needs talent, and we need to attract talent to Michigan jobs from out of Michigan and grow this population. But we also need the people coming up through our education systems here in Michigan. So what you're doing and the work that you're studying is so sorely needed. And I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners and the other people that are trying to make this happen. I feel I'm almost out of my depth on what else I should be asking you. Is there anything that you want to deliver to our audience before we wrap up that I haven't teed you up to deliver?
I guess one thing is, I think, and maybe this relates well to Michigan. Michigan, historically has been a manufacturing state. Blue collar, like working class, like we work hard.
Yeah.
Right. We don't give up. I would like people to take that mentality into their math education, whether as a teacher or as a student. One of the big things that math is seen as this kind of it's seen as really almost like a gatekeeper. It's got a lot of prestige, right? If you're good at math, like you must be smart. There's a lot given to that, and that starts to develop a sense of identity around intelligence in students very early on. And I think we need to shift that mentality more to be one of, like, let's try to persevere through this. So I'll give you an example. Like, I talk to a lot of students that come into the university, and not just Calvin, but other start out at other universities, and they've been what they say is like, I've been pretty good at math for most of my life. Like I've done well. And then they take Calculus 1 and it's the hardest thing they've ever done. Right. The wheels, that's great. The wheels come off. And I think, most of these students are doing this their first semester of their freshman year in college. And a lot of them don't even know how to do their own laundry, right? Or, manage their time. And now you're taking the hardest class that many people, some people would say organic chemistry, will ever take in a 4-year degree. And I think, and I was one of those students, right? So I had never had anything lower than an A in math, and I took Calculus 1 at Calvin, and I think I got a C. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not good at math, right? And I ended up changing what I was going to study. I ended up coming full circle and going back and taking that class again a few years later and getting an A. But I think we draw our conclusions too quickly about what we can and can't do, and what we are good at and what we're not good at. And I think if we made it okay to not do it perfectly the first time and accepted part of our whether we want to call them failures or shortcomings as just part of the learning process, that would go a long ways towards, I think, changing the mindset. So math anxiety is huge. To do complex, difficult mathematics, you have to, you can't be like in an anxious headspace, right? Like that's the first thing. Like you can't solve a hard problem when you're thinking you can't do it. Right. It's like my son's playing Little League baseball right now. Like during the season, I do not talk to him about his swing or his hitting, because I feel like if as soon as he gets in his head about it, it's going to become hard. You're absolutely right. I've experienced that too. Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you coming out. We've been speaking with the director for the Master of Arts in Teaching at Calvin University, Mr. Erek Kooyman. Erek, keep up the great work. Let us know, is there any way that people can follow this journey that you're on? Are there any websites or platforms if people are interested in hearing about the educational prowess of the state of Michigan's kids? You can certainly follow at Calvin School of Education on social media, Instagram. You can come to our website. There's a lot of great stuff going on in the state right now around education. There's a group called Talent Together that's doing some pretty cool stuff to get people who did not consider education or didn't finish a degree in education to come back and join the educational workforce. Nice. A group called K-Connect in Kent County, where I'm at, that's really trying to think about this work as well. So there is a lot of energy and a lot of good stuff going on around our state right now. Awesome. Well, keep fanning the flames. We need it. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks.